Welcome to Monarchist Minute, Royalist news and discussion out of the good old US of A. I am Charles York. Joining me tonight are Victor Smith, William Stout, Darth Kilhoun, and a new guy brought up at not quite literally, but almost close enough the last minute, Avo Bar Baroon.
Just
Well,
call
I'll
him
let him
Avo.
say his name. Why not?
I am. My name is Isaac, and I am the first Baron of Moidau.
Okay. Um.
Uh,
So.
ask
Yeah. So. Yeah, this was quite last minute because we had no idea. I had no idea about this until like 3 minutes ago. Now remember how I told you guys last week that I shall return, and then I didn't. I have returned. Uh, I didn't. I kind of expected it to be that episode, but never mind. Anyways, this normal Charles approved rant of an intro aside, it is time for our topics. We only have three listed ones, but you know how well that normally goes. So first up, we are going to talk about Michigan Prop 3, which is your standard pro-abort thing that they're going to try to ram into my beloved state's constitution. Yay! Um, it's I don't know. We'll just talk about that. You know what? I'm just gonna let someone else who is more coherent than I am right now give their thoughts after, presumably from someone who's actually read the text, like I have. I will
this
let someone do that
state
now.
of
I'll let
Ohio
me do
is
that.
superior in every way to the state of Michigan.
You're a
Mark
square. Your
Twain.
state is a square. You probably are the most square. Well, okay. Besides Wyoming. Okay. Besides the states that are intentionally
Not a
squares.
square. My state is shaped like a heart, and we have a heartbeat bill. It is appropriate. What is your
We are a mitten. We are a mitten that keeps your hand warm. Your hand as you punch someone in the face. That is also appropriate. Okay. Well, anyways, so, there's a long and the short of this thing is that it is a, proposed amendment to the Constitution, as I have already said, that would quote, Article 1, Section 28, right to reproductive freedom. 1. Every individual has a fundamental right to reproductive freedom, which entails the right to make and effectuate decisions about all matters related to pregnancy, including but not limited to parental care, childbirth, postpartum care, contraception, sterilization, abortion care, miscarriage management, which no one ever is saying no to, but whatever, and infertility care. An individual's right to reproductive freedom shall not be denied, burdened, nor infringed upon unless justified by a compelling state interest achieved by the least restrictive means. Notwithstanding the above, the state may regulate the provision of abortion care after fetal viability, provided that in no circumstance the state shall prohibit an abortion that, in the professional judgment of an attending healthcare professional, is medically indicated to protect the life or physical or mental health of the pregnant individual. The state shall not discriminate in the protection or enforcement of this fundamental right. The state shall not penalize, prosecute, or otherwise take adverse action against an individual based
Right,
on
right, right.
go anyways. Essentially,
Yeah.
essentially it's
It is essentially a bog standard. The state is going to protect all abortions.
yeah, and the thing is with this one specifically, it's a little unclear because remember, this plus the rest of it is what's going to be going into the constitution of the state if it's passed. And let's see. Provided under no circumstances the state shall prohibit abortion in the professional judgment of an attending healthcare professional is medically inclined to protect the life or physical or mental health of the pregnant individual. So in other words, a doctor can just be bribed to write a little writ and say, "Oh, it's going to be emotionally damaging if this mother who's known she's been pregnant for 8 months is going to be forced to for the child that she brought into this world." Um, yeah, there's no way that little clause is going to be abused at all in the slightest, I mean, this entire this entire thing is just the whole thing is an affront to it's an affront to God and morality first and foremost. But it's not even consistent. I mean, it I mean, you can regulate essentially what it's saying is you can regulate abortion after fetal viability except after fetal viability. Because the doctor can just say, "Oh, yes, because this will cause X, therefore kill child. Ha ha ha. I enjoy new Ferrari." Um I mean, it's ridiculous. And the whole I mean, and it's like what was the other thing? What was the other thing? There's one other verse. Is this a song? The reproductive freedom for all initiative. Anyways, uh, let's see. A state interest is compelling only if it is for the limited purpose of protecting the health of an individual seeking care consistent with accepted clinical standards of practice and evidence-based medicine and does not infringe on that individual's autonomous decision making. What the heck does that mean? Like a state the state can let's see, nor infringe upon unless justified by a compelling state interest achieved in the least restrictive means. Okay, but if
Well,
essentially there is no way that I don't.
I
I'll
can
let
answer
someone else speak.
this, Charles. I can answer this. Basically, that unless the state finds a reasonable way, it basically is a clause that's put in all constitutionally grant rights, say, and it basically means that if the state has a reasonable intention for restricting a right because it benefits the greater good of the population, they can do so. For example, with the First Amendment, the state has a reasonable right to restrict obscene speech because it protects the general public who might be exposed to certain obscene content.
Well, okay,
So
but
also like the reason why they have wishy-washy text, this is done on purpose. It's written by lawyers on the purpose so that way if somebody tries to challenge this, they can use judges and use the rhetoric of lawyers and the manipulation of this law to further any end they wish. This is what Western judiciaries do. There's a lot of lawyers that court measures like these essentially to push forth agendas. So yeah, this is typical law meant to purposely make people confused, so that way there's no let's just say a retort because they're not saying anything really explicitly. And if this gets taken forth before a judge, they can use rhetoric to sway the jury or to go in the favor of their cause.
I mean, but the thing is that it says compelling state under the definition of compelling interest in this proposed amendment. It says that the state can't infringe on someone's bodily autonomy, which means which effectively nullifies the entire thing because the state can't tell a woman you can't have an abortion um because that would infringe upon her bodily autonomy. It's redundant. I
9 brings up a very good point in our text that the limit on what's compelling seems to cover literally anything. So why is the compelling bit in there in the first place?
I mean, yeah, I guess I don't know if that's what I was saying, but the whole I don't know, the whole thing is dumb. And then I believe on the ballot initiative, um hold on, let me pull up how it's going to appear on the ballot because you don't get the actual proposed text on the ballot. Let's see. Da, 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 da. Keep talking whilst I am typing. Let's see. Oh wait, but here it is. Okay, how does it appear on the ballot? Okay, ballot summary. Establish a new individual right to reproductive freedom, including the right to carry yada yada yada. Forbid state discrimination in enforcement of this right. Prohibit prosecution of individual person. State laws. Okay. The okay, but I think somewhere in there, this also means it eliminates parental consent because it doesn't say the state can regulate this, after 16 or whenever. It doesn't give an age, so parental consent's gone. Which I mean, abortion. I'm not saying there's any justifiable circumstance for abortion, but it's just all these things because here's I'm sorry I'm being incoherent, but I just remembered one of the things I want to bring up. All these ads that I'm getting bombarded with, it's like this stupid like Apple like iOS texting, and the person who's getting texted didn't turn on dark mode, which is many cringe. But she's getting texted or whatever, and it's like, oh, this is unreal. It's like, what did I miss? And then it's a link to the New York Times, the end of row, whatever. It's like, uh, oh, I'm so angry. Is there anything we can do? And then the lady she's texting just suddenly goes like full on campaign marketing and says Prop 3 protects the rights we've had in Michigan for 50 years. No, it doesn't. It expands the rights you've had in Michigan for 50 years to a point where I would assume a fair number of Michiganians don't wouldn't actually agree. And I'm not saying that this is an appeal to democracy because it's stupid. It's all this is being pushed as advertisement is just a continuation of the abortion rights that women have enjoyed in this state for since the end of since the Roe v. Wade was first created as precedent. And no one is actually saying the actual text of the thing. None of these pro advertisements are actually telling you exactly what that would entail, because this is the thing with democracy. No one's going to check. Is anyone really going to check? I mean, until a few days ago, at least, and maybe it still is, if you searched Michigan Prop 3, you would have to it wouldn't just pop up as like the first thing. You had to scroll down a little bit, admittedly only a little bit, because all you would get was Michigan Prop 3 from 2018. So I think what these ads are banking on is that no one's actually going to bother to check and see that this is just some radical thing, because it would also remove all laws regulating abortion in the state as they exist right now. So that would mean that unless the state at least from my understanding, unless the state legislature passes a law that would restrict abortion after the point of fetal viability, then all abortion would just be legit, presumably even partial birth abortion, until the state decides to come up with a law. That's not keeping
So,
the rights we've had.
okay, I'm going to try to organize your thoughts a little bit.
Please let Darth
So so
be
so
better.
this is going on to the ballot in the next election, correct?
Yes, the midterms that are coming up
So
this November.
so my on the reason why democracy is the most totalitarian form of government demand. It is because it requires every single person in the society to be completely consumed into politics, devote every moment of it to politics, devote every moment of his life to trying to understand the law, all these institutions, everything, because supposedly his vote matters in all this. Supposedly, this is in theory, of course, and quite frankly,
So,
people do not have the time to simply devote their entire life to politics to the government, and then they vote, and they don't really know what they're voting for 9 times out of 10. They don't know the people on the ballot. They just see names or they see political affiliations, and they go by tribe because, quite frankly, it doesn't matter in the long term. Also, then this is more a procedural thing, but Stalin kind of said it best that it doesn't matter the person that votes, it matters the person who counts the votes. So you can be led to believe that somebody won an election, and in reality, it has simply been a manipulation of the votes by by the committee counting them. And remember, it's a committee, and committee are formed by people, and people have their natural biases. So if you control the committee that counts the votes, you control the elections. You control the people who get these offices, these positions, etc. And then these people write these laws, or they use NGOs. NGOs are non-governmental organizations, by the way, to write these things for them. Like, actually, most congressmen don't write their own legislation. Most congressmen just get NGOs to write legislation for them, and then the congressmen put them up before Congress. That's literally how the entire United States system works. So, yeah, that's
To
my
jump in here,
explanation of like what the procedure is going on here.
real quick. I remember learning about NGOs in our business law class I took for work, and honestly, the entire idea of it is just disgusting to me. The way our textbook justified it was that they exist so that laws for like businesses and stuff can be universal in every state without there being like small legal or term differences that might cause issues or confusion in the courtroom, back to stupid lawyer speak and over technicality and blah 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 blah. Idea that massive non-for-profit organizations that have their own agenda, have their own interests, write for lawmakers that we elect for the explicit purpose of writing and making laws is absurd. It's horrific. And
And I
honestly,
just realized that Bill from oh yeah, I'm just a Bill. I think Disney owns that, so I can't sing it for more than 2 seconds. But I think Bill was written by an NGO, or at least a bunch of people pestered the congressman like, oh, the buses should stop at railway crossings. Ah!
how you're actually supposed to make a bill. You're supposed to pester your
Well, he's supposed to be a congressman, but I think there may be a chance that he was. I don't know. It's a little unclear because it's a 4-minute song that's supposed to brainwash children into thinking the U.S. government works a certain way. But it's a very catchy song, brainwashing children into thinking the U.S. government works a certain way. But no, but yeah, no, it's a little unclear. Capitol Bill may have been written as an NGO. Why do I interject stupid, pointless things that add no relevance to the discussion whatsoever?
I don't
Because I
know,
think
but
that's how your brain works. It's probably like a disorganized mess that you just want to get out there.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I apologize.
don't we all do it?
Oh,
Um,
so you're saying you're
but yeah, so
just
like
as being disorganized as I am.
Yeah, the
so
secret is I keep
like
distracted with something else.
Hmm.
yeah, and talking about distractions is like, why I use the terms totalitarian when I refer to democracy is because democracy requires total concentration and total absorption into the functions of the state, and that is a form of totalitarianism, whether people like to use the term or not. And like it's also manipulation of the procedural outcomes in democracy as well that causes it to be very authoritarian. Uh, and they tend to use indirect methods to gain democratic systems. Like you saw this in ancient Athens, where demagogues would typically take over institutions within Athens to manipulate elections to eventually devolve into a tyranny of a one man, one party rule. I mean, that's what you see in a lot of democracies that actually happens. And it's very hard to go from any other system to a tyranny. That democracy is one of the easiest transitions into a tyranny.
It's just and seeing how easy it is too. How you can just convince people that ballot measure means certain thing because you're just not going to tell them, and that not everyone is actually going to look it up. I mean,
Mhm.
that is
you do look it up, it's nearly impossible to use the websites and or read the material to understand it, because anyone that's gone onto a government website knows that these websites look like they're from the late 90s and are nearly impossible to navigate.
Look,
And
our
And
government is
wanna
and
go-
best
search
to
what I
engines
make it
wanna go-
lie.
purposely hide information as well. Like they purposely mislead you, and you type something up, and they give you alternative sources to try to deflect your aims. Like that's what search engines do with algorithms. So
You
yeah,
know,
it's also
And of course,
go
there's
ahead, Baron.
and of
uh,
course also the fact that bills are made unreasonably long, so nobody can actually read them in a reasonable amount of time and comprehend them.
that's precisely it. They're written by lawyers for lawyers. And there's something interesting that you guys might actually interesting are the chances for a bill to actually pass. When a bill is introduced, it doesn't matter, granted that it has no support from external interests like groups and whatnot. I like to call them bribery groups, but I digress. Given a chance that you have a bill that has no support from outside interests in Congress, it only has about a 30% chance of passing. Okay, and if you think you're voting in these in your representatives, which you very might well be doing, no matter if that bill is the most popular bill that has ever been introduced on the floor of Congress, or if it is the most unpopular, still has a 30% chance statistically of passing. Now, if it has a large group of, say, lobbyists behind it, different interest groups, I don't know, the first one that comes to the top of my head is the NRA, then the chances,
ACLU, the
yeah,
Teamsters, etc.
yeah, the chances of that bill passing skyrocket, and they can't ever reach above 70%, but the maximum chance statistically for a bill to pass with major outside support can reach up to 70%. And that doesn't matter if the bill is the most popular bill in the world or the least popular. I find it appalling that for some reason, like one of the most hated institutions in pretty much every single democracy that there is, you have it, the Congress or the Parliament, they somehow manage to convince the people that they still have some sort of voice in what they're trying to pass. And even though that they're hated so widely, they still convince the people or have the people defend them, because people think that they actually have a choice in choosing their leaders and what's going on the Senate and House floors.
Yeah, it's. I mean,
Ladies and gentlemen, Koshi Undying has come up to the stage. He has been banging down the door, as it were, to respond to this. So, Kosh, go ahead.
That's not how statistics works. Statistics takes an average of everything. So this whole idea of like, oh, it doesn't matter if it's popular or not. No, that's not how it works. It would be an average of popular things and not popular things.
I'm not an
So
expert on the subject. I'm just quoting a research firm on that subject, on that matter.
well, I mean, I don't know how directly you're quoting from them, but if they're saying it doesn't matter how popular it is, then I don't think they understand how statistics works either. That's all I really have to say at the moment.
okay, bye-bye.
Thank you very much for that, Kosh. So has everyone?
Let's see. I had yesterday or the day before or something. I had this grandiose. Oh, now I know what I'm gonna say. I completely forgot another thing. Completely valid legit transition. Pretend that was smooth. Pretend that everything naturally led up to this point. Okay. Anyways, so no, I mean it's this whole thing with democracy. It's the the fact that something like this can be voted on. The fact that something like this is the system allows something like this to even be considered in any serious sense just shows you how wicked it is, right? If the state constitution had an article saying that it would be illicit to propose the murder of propose the murder of anyone and make that legal, then this wouldn't be an issue. But then again, the people who probably wrote the state of Michigan Constitution probably would have thought, "Oh, no one's ever going to, uh, no one's ever going to try to make murder law or anything." Am I right, guys? Right? Right. Well, anyways, no, I mean this is the thing with democracy. Okay, King Charles I said princes are not bound to give an account of their actions, but to God alone. Okay, and that's the thing. The kind of monarchy that I advocate for, that Catholic monarchy, something like this just wouldn't be allowed. Something like this couldn't actually happen because the society itself in its most fundamental roots would be opposed to something like this. Even if you had a vastly pro-life America, okay, no one's going to necessarily explicitly turn this down because referendums are in democracy and voting and that's what we're about. So you couldn't just necessarily reject something on principle because there's no argument for not allowing someone to vote on something if it gets the number of signatures. It doesn't matter if it gets the 10,000 signatures or whatever. It doesn't matter that 99% of the population thinks it's insane. If it gets there's no, in a democratic framework like ours in our republic, there's no argument to not put it on the ballot. I mean, if you got the 100,000 signatures or the 10,000 signatures or whatever it is for the U.S. government to build a Death Star, then it's going to be put on the ballot. I mean, if you get enough signatures on whitehouse.gov, the White House has to respond to it, no matter how stupid it was. And actually, somebody did manage to get enough signatures for the White House to say, "Hey, will you build a Death Star?" And the White House said, "No, we're not gonna." Anyways, probably the only semi-sane thing Obama said. But I don't know. I wouldn't want a Death Star. But anyways,
That's a
the
waste
that's
of
the thing. That's
resources.
that's
The
the thing
Turk
with
Doctrine
democracy that
was
I
done.
despise.
Now, hold up, hold up,
Well,
hold up. A Death Star is a waste of resources. The Tarkin Doctrine was proven failure, making massive super weapons for the purpose of state-funded terror in order to keep the galaxy in check, proven to be part of the downfall of the Empire.
Look,
so
I know
yeah,
we
I
gotta
mean,
get back
I
to a
agree
real
with
topic.
the Thrawn doctrine was more effective, but let's not devolve into Star Warsism
Yeah,
here.
we can talk about this later, but I liked my space
Yeah.
triangles, but not that many.
So I mean, like in democracy, everything is permissible. Everything is allowed to be questioned. The only thing that's sovereign is the law. Like they even displace God. Like democracy is upholden to nobody besides itself in air
It's
quotes, because oftentimes it's submissive to committees and councils and all these things. Like the Committee of Public Safety in France. Let's remember what they did in the name of democracy. uh Lovely.
it's a real shame if you
All
look at what. Oh, go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say, do all of you know what the Committee of Public Safety was in the French Revolution?
Chop
Haha,
chop.
Gene
Hmm.
Gang.
Yeah, chop chop. I mean that's what democracy does. It permisses everything because everything is allowed to be questioned. Everything, as long as it's put up to a vote, is allowed to be permitted. So even down to martyring Carmelite nuns. Yeah.
Yeah, and people will say, but we need to question everything. No, we don't. Okay, no one is seriously going to question. There are just certain things that in the realm of moving outside the realm of the political, there are just certain things that no sane person is going to question. No one's going to say, if I just let go, this book I'm holding, the works of Charles Dickens, complete and unabridged, no one is seriously going to question, if I just let this go, is it going to float upwards? No, because we all know that it's going to drop. I mean, there are certain things we don't question, but with democracy, even the most common sense, anything, like you can't murder someone, even the most common sense things become up for grabs. And I mean, it's just
Consensus does not derive correctness.
I know.
Woke up tomorrow and a majority of the people on the planet believed that the Earth was flat, the Earth magically wouldn't become a frisbee hurling itself through space.
And,
I
and,
know,
and
and I mean
remember,
that, and I mean
Anyway,
that.
Christ
irrelevant
was
to the
condemned.
text.
Christ was condemned to death by a democratic mob whooped up by the Pharisees. So remember that as well.
And also remember that vote was technically rigged because they intentionally made.
Why are you not wearing a party hat?
Yeah, but
Okay.
it was still a vote, and the vote was considered valid. So they put Christ to death. It's like that was democracy.
Yeah,
There's
no.
a perfect example of this, of what happened in Luxembourg when they were going to pass a bill to fully legalize abortion. I'm not caught up on all the legal details of it, but the basic gist of it was that the Duke of Luxembourg, he refused to sign the bill that was placed before him because he's a good Christian, and he would not stand for something like that. That's the monarch, or I guess in this case the Duke's job. However,
a duke was the monarch.
the Parliament did not approve of that, and they made an amendment, I believe, to their constitution to strip him of his power of being able to actually sign the law, needing his permission to sign the law, so that they can sign the law anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Anything is permissible.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah. In Belgium, the same thing happened, except for they actually became a Belgium republic for like an hour to pass abortion because they dethroned the monarch temporarily. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just, and this is the danger of democratic bodies too. I still think, there could be a place for a parliament, but provided that that parliament in no way whatsoever actually has any authority at all, and if anyone tries to give it any sort of real authority, it is punched. Well, it is
So
kicked to the curb. It's just an advisory
I
body.
say like I say honestly, like the only time an assembly should be called is I kind of like agree with the feudal lens that if you're taxed, you should have the right to raise new tax to determine if new taxes are raised. Kind of like the Estates General was in many countries, including France, most famously, where each class that paid taxes would get representation, notably the clergy and nobility and the bourgeoisie, and then later you would probably have to include a fourth estate because then average people started paying taxes, especially in the modern day with things like income tax. So if I would only have a parliament to determine if new taxes are actually passed or not, that'd be its only power.
No power, just make a recommendation. I
Yeah,
don't
and
know.
then you'd
It's
have
just
like an upper as well that would actually write legislation, like say kind of like the Bundesrat in the German Empire, where it was representatives sent by each of the princes of the various kingdoms, duchies, principalities, etc., that made up the German Empire, and each one had different numbers of votes based on the population. Like Prussia technically had the most, but they were outnumbered by like Bavaria, Württemberg, and Baden if they united their votes. So
that
in their version of like the Senate.
so the emperor, as king of Prussia, got to send his own representatives.
Yeah, the Kaiser sent the Prussian representatives. The King of Bavaria would send his representatives, and so on.
I don't know. I find that interesting that the representatives for the King of Prussia are drafting legislation to be approved by the Kaiser, even though they're the same person. I think that I don't know. I like
Yeah,
that. I like that. No, that's
This
the kind of system.
it
That's the
was
kind of system that you can make a little 5-minute YouTube video on, and then like even though it really only needed 30 seconds, but you can expand it out to 5 minutes. That's
an
see,
empire.
that's why the German Empire should have survived into the present day. That's the only reason.
The German Empire
I
was very much an extension of the Prussian state to hold hegemony over the rest of Germany, regardless of the constitution.
and I push back on that a little bit. Actually, having studied the German Constitution and knowing of the reality of the time, like Bavaria was still very much Bavaria, despite it being part of the same empire as Prussia, and like Württemberg also they maintain their own army within the German army. Bavaria maintained their own army, Saxony, and then Prussia. Those were the four components of the German army were divided up between the kingdoms. So, and Bavaria actually explicitly didn't renumber their regiments based on the Prussian model, unlike the other states. So it's like that there's waxing and waning on which states were Prussianized and which ones weren't. Like only really the northern German states were Prussianized. The southern ones tended to actually be fairly autonomous. It was actually
But
more they had more autonomy in U.S. states at the time.
what were the four kingdoms of the German Empire? I know Prussia, Bavaria, but I don't know the other two.
Saxony and Württemberg.
Württemberg.
Ah,
I didn't
Saxony.
like Hanover, maybe, or
No, Hanover was
No,
it was an electorate.
Hanover was annexed into Prussia.
Oof.
I'm surprised Saxony
So, like,
wasn't. I would have been in their cards.
no, that's because Saxony, like, despite them being one of the most militarily ones, after the Napoleonic Wars, they switched side against Napoleon. They used to be like the most staunch allies, so that's kind of what kept them alive in their reduced form. Like they actually used to be a much bigger kingdom, but then because they sided with
Hello.
Napoleon and the other half of Saxony remained independent, it was part of the Metternich negotiations post the Napoleonic Wars. It's very complex history then. But Metternich was a chancellor of the Austrian Empire, and he pretty much lorded over the new Napoleonic world order.
Yes,
Y-
Saxony is weird. The only thing I know about it is that it went Protestant originally, but then a couple generations later, the royal family converted back to Catholicism, but like very little. I
Yeah,
mean, I'm sure some of the peasantry did, but generally they didn't. So you had a Catholic. You see,
it was
you s-
roughly a
yeah,
50-50 split in Saxony. Like you typically like the northern parts that were closer to Prussia were Lutheran still, while then
it,
the southern parts that were closer to Austria and Bavaria were Catholic. It's kind of like Bavaria had the same situation where when they annexed Francia, when they became or Franconia, it's the northern region of Bavaria today, which was annexed when Napoleon invaded the Holy Roman Empire and made Bavaria a kingdom. It was like the one part that had Lutheran populations that are still part of Bavaria, but it was still like 80% Catholic in Bavaria.
that may be where. You see, in Michigan, we had the town of Frankenmuth, which was founded by a bunch of Bavarian immigrants. So it's like, ooh, based, right? Well, no, it was the Lutheran ones. It's like, okay, of all the towns to be founded, by Bavarians and have all this beautiful, beautiful Bavarian architecture, this is the one that happens to be founded by the Lutherans. I mean, come on, guys.
Yeah, I mean, I know some Lutheran Bavarians as well. They're extremely rare, especially outside of Bavaria. Not many of them migrated to America, unlike Catholic Bavarians, which you'll see a lot more of, like moi here. But
Yeah.
yeah, but Bavaria is a unique place. Like you could dedicate a study to it all on its own, and it's kind of like the picturesque like Tolkien world. Like if Tolkien wanted his like ideal place in the world, Bavaria would be definitely a place he would idealize.
I don't know, Europe. I don't know. I don't think there's really not many
Again,
places in Europe I don't like the natural landscape. I mean, the architecture obviously, but the natural landscape. I don't think there's any bad place in Europe. I mean, but Bavaria, from what I've seen, is exceptionally beautiful.
Yeah,
so
it
what?
is pretty much like the
And to
shires of Germany.
yes, it is. It is absolutely beautiful. And we actually just saw a little bit of Munich on the reality television show The Amazing Race this past Wednesday. They were racing around Munich.
Yeah.
Hey,
Hello.
Anyway, what are Germany's abortion law, just to try to tie this back
oh,
into
oh,
what we were
they're
discussing?
super strict. They're well, I mean, compared to America, like all of Europe is super strict compared to America. America has the most liberal abortion laws in the world. Uh, literally the most liberal. Britain is like a close follower, but they are still even more strict than us. Typically, it's only up to the 8th week. In Bavaria, I mean not Bavaria, in Germany. In some states, it's up to the 16th week, but you have states in the United States that have like up until literally birth, like California. And I take the highest common denominator, and several states have it up until birth. So technically, we have the most liberal abortion laws.
And
So,
And even
and
France, that had the French Revolution, is more strict.
a good point was brought up by Prussian Dixie that China, North Korea, and Canada have more liberal abortion laws than
well,
Europe. I believe it's
Well,
Europe,
I,
excluding Holland and
I,
Britain.
I was yeah, I was
Why not
talking about
use
Europe. I wasn't including Canada.
Right, of course, and
But I mean,
we should
I'd have to
probably,
study Canadian abortion laws. But
yeah, and of course as people say, as Democrats are wont to say, we want America to be more like Europe. Well, a national, let's say, 15-week abortion ban would be more like Europe than what we are today.
well, they want us to be more like Europe in the worst sense than they do the than this areas where they're
the
slightly more sane. Now, don't get me
the
wrong.
slightly better.
The slightly, yeah, yeah. Now, if I had to pick between the two, I guess I'd pick Europe's more restrictive laws. But that's like saying, would you rather be shot with a 50 caliber slap round, or would you rather be shot with a 22? I'd rather not be
22
shot at
behind the
all.
ear.
Huh?
I mean, yeah. I mean, yeah. Like,
Yeah.
well, I think I'd have to look up Poland, but I believe that they recently amendments on their constitution banning abortion. I believe I've heard rumors about it, but I haven't like actually officially looked into it. But I could believe that Poland would do something like that.
Poland just continues to be an island of sanity in a sea of wokeness. The communists did not do their job very well.
Wała Polska.
It's funny, like all the communist, like former communist countries remain more culturally conservative than the rest of Europe. I honestly that's
Guarantee-
because I do believe that bourgeois democracy is the most let's just say destructive, morally speaking, force in the world.
Yeah, I mean it's interesting because when you have a communist state that's very explicit in hating everything that you stand for, like hating the church and doing all of these, evil things, treading the cross while they adore some red star. That gives it's very obvious, so you can prepare yourself to fight it. But with us, it's not that we're an anti-Christian society. We're just a society with a freedom of religious beliefs, and we're not teaching anything. We're not enforcing our values. We're just secularizing the schools. It's not designed to destroy all that's good and true and beautiful. Trust me, guys. It's all democracy is. There are some people who just won't notice it, especially in the early stages. In the 1950s, no one's gonna. Well, I mean, all this had been going on, but the 1950s, I guess, is when it started to really go. I mean, nobody really noticed that when we desecularize, when we started to yeet prayer out of schools, which the public schools were. I'm not saying the public schools were ever great; they were just a bunch of apostasy machines. But yeah, I mean, no one's gonna say, "Oh, they're not being anti-Christian. They just want fairness, right, guys? Right?"
So, like, my common retort to this is like the boomer mentality that plagues a lot of the discourse in America, because boomers are like, well, where did we go wrong? Like, it was going so great, God. No, these seeds were planted in your generation and generations before you as well. The system implicitly breaks down these social barriers, these traditional aspects, etc. It's a very, very slow decline. Um, and that's why people don't notice it as much. That's why, like, there's the meme of, like, the Republicans will be like, well, we are the true trans activists in the year 2040. Like, they're eventually going to get to that because it's a degradation. Like, and conservatives are just the controlled opposition for the right in any liberal democratic government. And that's why you typically see, like, the Republicans, like, they went from being, oh yeah, we're against gay marriage, to, well, we're for sensible gay marriage, we're for sensible, like, trans rights, we're for, yeah, they're
Yeah,
that they
in
always
40
that always
years,
happens.
in
And
40
like you
years,
see,
they're. Oh, sorry.
oh, I'm just saying, like, you see this in France, you see this in England, I mean, Britain, you see this in Germany, you see this in Austria, you see this in Italy. Always the center right parties will back whatever the left wing parties do and say, now that's conservative. Like that
Yeah,
that's literally what pretty much, like, the Republicans today are like, can we go back to Obama era policies? Like, that's what they view as conservative.
yeah. It's in 40
Just had
years.
a very, I just had a thought. Sorry to cut in. I just had a thought. When I was in college, my advisor, he and I were talking, and he said that he claims that his wife is a conservative. And his wife would argue to him, actually, these gun reform things are true conservatism. So I have actually experienced something like this. It's quite amusing to think about.
Yeah, it's. I don't know. I mean, in 40 years, I mean, people talk about it as a joke, but there's truth in kidding, and I think that a lot of people actually believe it, and we're just trying to, do. We're just trying to survive with the dark humor to stave off the depression. But people say, it's 2040, and the Republicans will say the Supreme Court did did not when they said gay marriage was legit, they did not mean polygamy, man. That's one step too far. We're here to defend traditional gay marriage. We are not expanding it to. I mean, it's just.
I wanted to make a joke about Republicans in Utah. I was like, yeah, they probably don't have an issue with polygamy, come to think of it.
No, I mean, it's just it's just ridiculous. I mean all of these, we got to defend the original meaning of the Supreme Court. It's and I'm not saying that there was never, and I'm not saying that every single decision the Supreme Court makes is wrong.
Well,
Mostly, no. I mean, it's just that most of them are wrong and stupid. I mean, it's. Although I will admit that the people will say, what was I gonna say? Oh, right, I was interrupted. Okay, I will admit there are some things I used to get mad about, like when the Supreme Court, and I still kind of am upset about this. It's like, Supreme Court. If you look at the history of all these cases involving the Interstate Commerce Clause, the Supreme Court gradually expanded it to where the Interstate Commerce Clause has just become the Intrastate Commerce Clause. And on the one hand, it's like if you're going to pretend to have if you're going to have a constitution, at least pretend to follow it. I mean, otherwise, it's just sitting there in a museum, and it's nothing more than an artifact as opposed to something that actually does anything. But but we already talked about that at length in another episode. But it's I used to really get mad about that, but now I think, yeah, I guess that's just a tool, because I mean, hey, it did allow the Supreme Court to make pot illegal in California, so, or declare it was totally legit for the feds to bust a pot organization. But I don't know. I don't know. Does anyone have any final thoughts? Because I think I've been monopolizing.
Good.
My only final thought that I'm going to give is that if you question hard enough, you will eventually find your way to the truth in the end. If you keep questioning hard enough and you keep asking questions in good faith and people give you the answers to your questions, you will discover the truth eventually.
I mean, the Socratic method can only work in very specific circumstances, and that requires everybody to be on a quote unquote good faith, and it requires idealism essentially. So
yes, absolutely. That's why I said in good faith.
Well, no,
yeah,
I mean,
like that. You just described the Socratic method, by the way, and that's what
Yeah.
got Socrates killed, because he kept on questioning everything, and the Athenian oligarchy were like, by the way, like I use oligarchy in like the term that Plato's Republic used, where it was literally rule by the rich. Like the oligarchic council was like, yeah, the Socrates guy, he's making Athenians not patriotic enough. Let's by questioning the authority of the Athenian state, let's axe him.
Which isn't that why a government run by the rich is called a plutocracy today, because it refers to Plato? Or
I mean, Plato advocated for monarchy, so he hated oligarchy, he hated democracy, and he hated tyranny, and he was like, nope, monarchy is the most natural form of government.
right, but I can't remember where the term plutocracy is derived from.
I think
well,
it
you
might
see,
be
you had
derived
Plutarch.
from. I think it might have been derived. Well, everything else is Greek, so I'm assuming Plutos is the Greek for rich.
Right.
So
Pluto is the god of wealth, so that might be it.
Yeah.
anyway, let's get to
Well, okay.
more
Well,
final thoughts.
well, hold on. Anyone else have any final thoughts before we move on to topic number the second topic of the topic? Uh
9.
oh. Oh, whoops. Never mind. So I'm sorry. Anyway, so does anyone else have any? Okay.
Yeah, I don't think there's any objections here.
Okay, I'm
let's
sorry. I
move
just
on.
wanted to be double sure. Okay, I marked down timestamp. Am I always just coherent? Maybe the first step to fixing yourself is
Yes,
realizing
you
you have a
are.
problem. Okay, well, at least I realized I've had a
Yes,
problem.
you do have a
Okay,
problem.
second topic. The Ukraine thing. So we're gonna let the guy who's been mostly silent give an update on Ukraine, because that's what he was here for. Sorry to keep you waiting.
Hey, no worries. So basically, as of recent, and if you want me to, I can update you on Armenia and whatnot as well. I'm a bit more knowledgeable on that. But just recently, as you all know, it was all over the news. The Ukrainian counteroffensive managed to get the Russians to retreat from that area. But one thing that they're not actually sharing is that the counteroffensive, it was a two-front counteroffensive, one up north in Kharkiv, and there was a counteroffensive down south in Kherson. The one in Kharkiv was, of course, a more successful one. In Kherson, not as much. And there's good reason for that. If you look at the geography of Kherson, it is simultaneously very easy to defend. It's all farm fields, and so it is easy to defend in the ways that you can see everything that's coming towards you. And
as someone in the armed forces myself, making an assault over open fields is one of the stupidest moves any military can do. And if you attempt it, and if you attempt it, one, you better have a lot of armor, or else a lot of people are going to die. And pretty much you could defend fronts like that with sheer artillery power if you have enough concentrated, which I know the Russian army has a lot of.
That is precise doing. And you're 100% correct. In Kherson, the hospitals, or near Kherson, the hospitals in Mykolaiv completely filled with Ukrainian wounded because of the sheer amount of casualties that they just took. They sacrificed a lot to try to take back some territory from Kherson. It cost them. It cost them very dearly.
Someone's saying in our chat also. Yeah. Someone's saying in our chat that yes, Russian troops are moved from the north to the south. Yeah, I know there have been Russian troop movements to the south for a prepared Russian offensive that hasn't materialized yet. But yeah, but they weren't put into defensive stances. Like, I know also, like, you can't just like throw men into an area and like either you set up to defend or you set up to go on the offensive. It is very timely to organize for both. The units that were organized for defensive operations took out the Ukrainians, not the rest of the units that were preparing for an offensive, because it's really hard to reorganize units from preparing for an offensive to preparing for a defensive operation. That's just what I wanted to mention.
What does that look like? I mean, like, I'm trying to picture, because you had to have, if you're having a unit that's supposed to, you have two ends of a field and and the two armies are outside of like artillery range. What does a unit that's preparing to go on the offensive look like? Because there's got to be like some
So that's
like,
setting up like that's setting up supply routes. That's organizing various units, like say putting armored companies together, putting logistical units together, putting medical units preparing to deploy with the offensive units to take care of casualties. That is storing of ammunition for offensives, etc. It's a lot of especially logistical work, pre-hand that goes into offensives. While defensives, I mean, yes, there's a lot of logistical work as well, but it mostly involves digging a fighting positions for your men that they can successfully hold, placing artillery into strategic positions where they can support the defending infantry, digging tank ditches for because tanks can also defend. They're not just an offensive weapon, but they typically need places to. Well, yeah, not in the 1920s. Like, especially with modern main battle tanks today. Like, I'm an engineer, so I'm trained in actually digging tank ditches for tanks to use in defensive operations, where you dig a depression into the ground. That's typically a tank width wide that you typically use like a dozer with, and you dig down until like essentially the entirety of the tank would be concealed by dirt. And then you dig an exit ramp so that way the tank can go up, and fire, go back into the tank ditch, and can come back also the other way in case he needs to escape. So, it's very complex setting up for defensive operations, and it's also very complex setting up for offensive operations. They both require completely different completely different doctrines, completely different logistics, and just general overall operations.
If I can interject, I was actually watching a video about the Ukrainian counteroffensive earlier today, and what they told me about the difference between the Kharkiv and the Kherson fronts is that the idea was that due to the destruction of infrastructure and the constraints of Russian logistics, it was only possible for Russia to defend one of these fronts. And so the idea behind the Ukrainian move was that Russia would have to pick either front and therefore be able to exploit the other front completely. Now, the only problem with this plan long term that benefits Russia is that this actually gives them breathing room to strengthen their lines because now they're defending less ground and therefore can concentrate more troops in an area.
Well,
They're defending a much more advantageous position now than they were before.
Exactly. That's what I mean.
and not being an expert in Ukrainian geography, but I think that one of the maintaining the South what makes the most sense because now Russia has a land bridge between the Crimea and Russia proper, and they really need to maintain that. And also, isn't the area that the Ukrainians are trying to recapture where the Crimea's water comes from? Because like the
Yeah.
Crimea was dying of
Yes.
thirst for a few years because the water was being pumped in.
Yeah, that was one of the Russia's
it
first
was dammed.
targets.
Yeah.
The dam
So
they
let's
immediate.
let's talk about the other half of the counteroffensive, the one that we haven't blocked. The other, sorry, the other half of that. I believe it's the Kharkiv half.
Yeah, what's
We
going
spent all
on?
this time talking about Kherson.
Okay,
So
so
What's with all the K's?
ask the Russians that named all these places.
yeah.
Kiev,
Uh,
Kharkov,
yeah. So
escape from Kharkov.
the the offensive has slowed down considerably. It is still going on, but right now, what's happening near Kharkiv across the Oskol River, the territory there is very tested. Yampil is controlled. Like Yampil is like split in half between Russia and Ukraine. Right now, they just took back, I think, 3 villages northeast of Yampil. No, sorry, not northeast, northwest, and they're trying to make a push right currently to surround the town and so that they can take it. That's still going on right now. The result of that until days later. But right now, the Russians are doing absolute work, shelling the positions, shelling Ukrainian positions over into their into different cities and defensive positions that they're taking right now. They're still destroying some ammunition depots. And I mean the artillery attacks they're taking place all along the front because that is Russia's primary weapon that they're using right now. But in Kharkiv, it's most fierce because of Ukraine's fervent push in that area.
So
Yeah.
let's so
Also, just like a note, if for men actually on the ground, like say, I know we're like throwing around jargon like artillery, yada, logistics, ammo depots, etc. But for the average soldier on the front, especially if you're brand new, which I remember this explicitly when I initially joined the army, taking mortar fire and even like simulation artillery rounds, it is frankly pretty terrifying. You don't really know what's happening also when they impact, when like you don't really know what's going on because it just happens in a flash. Suddenly people are dying. You don't know what's happening. You don't know where you're taking fire from. It gets really confusing. So like especially artillery is one of the most terrifying weapons of the battlefield for the average infantryman, because it literally is just a psychological factor as well as being just devastating as well to the ranks.
And
So
before we move
let's,
on,
sorry for basically steamrolling here, but let's actually wargame this. Darth, because you are actually a trained soldier, I am going to have you I'm going to have you play defense and play the role of Ukraine. And Isaac, I'm going to have you play the role of Russia over the next few days. How would the two of you plan everything on this sort of counteroffensive? I'm going to allow Darth to go first because he is defense.
Well, I I mean, kind of knowing the state of the Ukrainian military, where it is made up of piecemeal forces, using like bits and pieces of weaponry from 100 different nations, 100 different weapon systems, etc. It's one that'd be a logistical nightmare, and I can assume that I'm not going to enjoy that at all. But and also the fact that I'm dealing with American hired mercenaries as well, and you don't necessarily know where mercenary loyalties lie. So yeah, there's some funny like Ukraine. There's some funny accents going around in Ukraine where they're speaking pretty fluent English right now. Sound pretty American. So I have at my disposal American mercenaries. I have at disposal literally conscript soldiers that have like a week of training at most. I have weapon systems that also my soldiers don't know how to use for the most part. I'm getting weapon systems from 100 different nations that all require different ammunition types. Uh, all different calibers for the small arms. Yeah, and then all different just vehicles in general. So I'm just gonna say that I don't get why I'd go on a counteroffensive. Because, quite frankly, I wouldn't trust my men to be able to carry out a counteroffensive in the current state of the Ukrainian army.
It's in complete tatters.
Yeah, I mean, literally, like, people say like the offensive in the north was a great success. It was 3 towns. It literally was 3
Mhm.
towns that they took. It's it's not like a blitzkrieg of France. Like it's not this great massive operation. It's like, yeah, 15,000 Ukrainian soldiers broke through 2,000 Russian defendants. It's like, yeah, and they probably also were organized into battalions that had let's just say homogenous weapon systems, and generally had the better trained men that were actually the veterans from years prior that didn't die in the initial month of this war. Uh, yeah, so I'm going to say that taking those 3 towns is probably the best that I can do, and just get the unit, start digging in my units, and start making defensive positions in the positions that they hold, or even retreating back into the initial positions, because quite frankly, the offensive in the south failed, and most likely those units are going to be needing reinforcements from the north to um, hold the positions in the south, especially with the Russian mobilization down there of their battalion tactical groups that are theoretically going to be used in a spearhead offensive in the near future. So I want to move my anti-tank weapon systems down there. The few javelins that most of my soldiers actually don't know how to fire. And by the way, the thing about like the javelins too is most of them have been in warehouses for literal decades, and the batteries in the systems that operate computers are worn down, and most of them just don't even work. So yeah, a lot of Ukrainian soldiers have died just because they try to fire off a javelin and it's not firing because it's the computer in it is not getting power.
and you
Also,
can't just put a couple
many
double A's in
Ukrainian
the chamber.
well, it okay. The
Like,
military
because
never goes
I
for
don't know.
what is easy, but I'm just like wargaming here as well. But
Okay.
Also, the fact that Ukrainian soldiers have died, not like they're literally thrown javelins and they're not trained on them. Like I've been in the military for 3 years and I've not been trained on anti-tank weapon systems either. So if you just threw me one too, I'd probably die like the Ukrainian soldiers that like a week of training as well. So yeah, if people don't know how to use their equipment, they're going to die. That's just plain and simple.
Unfortunately, yeah, that's the case.
And that's the reality.
Yeah.
Now, I want to tell you
Of course, too, and of course,
mobilization.
to
What does this mean for Russia?
Yeah, so mobilization is so it's actually really, I'm kind of a little baffled because I'm wondering how exactly go about doing this. The reason why I say that is because the US military has maybe I think maybe 10 or over 10 basic training camps centered all around the country or located all around, say. And those camps, they put about 150,000 recruits through basic every single year, give or take a few thousand. And you know how many Russia has? It's one. They have one basic training camp in the entire country. Yeah.
In the
So-
entirety of Russia.
Yeah, and so now they're calling up conscripts, and it's not even legal for them to use them in a war, and I'll touch on that real quick. They're calling up 300,000 conscripts. I'm really puzzled on how they're going to go about doing that.
There are 300,000 former conscripts that are now considered reservists because they finished their conscript time.
All from the ages of 18 to 6, by the way. There's
actually 42
Oh,
is
80?
like
Russia. Because they don't want to.
42 is the maximum age for reservist qualifications in Russia, which actually is better than the United States because the United States you can literally be 65 and still in the military reserves.
Okay. Thank you for correcting me on that. What was I going to say? Heck. Forgot.
so actually,
Number of training camps.
Oh yeah. They're also Putin called Kadyrov to muster about 85,000 more Chechens as well, and they just deployed the first 12 guys back into Ukraine. And for context, I think it was about 10,000 that entered the war initially.
Now, I think we've heard a lot of propaganda from both sides regarding the Chechens. How qualified are these Chechens actually?
I wouldn't know. What I do know is that I saw them firing their weapons over cover without actually looking what's over that. That's just one instance that I saw. A lot of people call them TikTok soldiers. I don't know. I'm not there, so I wouldn't be able to say.
I mean, as someone who's a complete layman, his firearm experience consists of just shooting them and cleaning. That's about it. Wouldn't that still kind of be a suppressive fire thing? Like maybe off screen, like some other guy was advancing, and it was just a kind of weird way of giving suppressive fire. I mean, not that a 30 round AK mag is necessarily the best for that, but
if you want
Comrade.
if you want to go on a suicide mission, then absolutely that is suppressive fire. But
well, I mean,
that's just really bad. That's just really bad military discipline.
well, no,
Looking
I
at
mean,
where shooting it is a good way to waste ammo or accidentally shoot your allies.
Yeah, I'm not risking accidentally firing into an apartment complex or anything. I that's not something I would do. That's a complete waste.
Speaking of
it's complicated because when it comes to room clearing in general, if it is if it's a too dangerous building to take by conventional room clearing, then you will have your men evacuate said building and essentially fire in fire into it, whether it's for the complete destruction of the building or for or just to suppress the enemy. So that way your troops can move on to other buildings and not be fired upon.
So,
It depends on the circumstance and depends on the officer's call.
yeah,
There's actually
and speaking of officer calls, I believe, Isaac, it's time for your half of the war game. You are Russia,
uh,
and Ukraine is doing their counteroffensive. What
And
are you
pretend
going
you
to be
didn't
doing?
just hear all of Darth's plans, General Darth Maw's plans.
yeah. Well, FYI, I am not military personnel. I've had a little bit of militia training, but that's not really saying anything at all. As far as what I would do as Russia, I would do what they're doing right now, and that's and preparing for their next offensive. It's not just artillery. I think they're flying about 250 sorties per day, bombing different positions and whatnot. Granted, per 250 sorties, about half an aircraft gets shot down. It is a risky thing to do, but to keep that kind of is essential. And speaking of, recently it was Iran that sent over dozens of suicides that have been used to great effect against military facilities that are way behind enemy lines. And so, if I had any more of those at my disposal, I would continue using them because Russia, more or less, I mean, they don't have, say, total complete air domination because Ukraine has around percent of its air force remaining. It still has relatively a superior air force than that to Ukraine. Ukraine. So, go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to ask: do people still field high altitude strategic bombers anymore, or it's just smart bombs being launched from fighter jets taking over? Because
High
like I feel like this be a
high
I don't
altitude
know.
bombing and the mass capacity we're probably thinking of with like massive fleets of bombers just bombing a target strategically is generally considered a waste of munitions this day and age.
I mean, I
Yeah.
know, but I
So
mean, I know
what?
that's I guess that's what I guess, but I mean, if you can get guided
To answer your
payload,
question,
okay.
yeah. To answer your question, it's multi-role fighters, and they still do have their strategic bombers, but what they're using them for are cruise missile launching platforms, and caliber cruise missiles have been extremely effective in against Ukrainian targets. So what they do is they fly their Tu-95s or whatever other plane that they're using. They strap about 3 missiles per wing, so it's about 6. They get them at a high altitude. They find a target, and the missile usually is going to hit its target, despite any Ukrainian air defenses there might be. There is a chance that they get shot. They do sometimes, but most likely the missile is going to hit its target. Unfortunately for Ukraine, that is.
Yeah. I do know that that much that but in the opening stages of the Iran-Iraq War, everyone thought that the Iranians were going to get stomped because they had like these American fighters that no one thought could dogfight. But then this was the era when you could just when you were able to launch missiles over the horizon, you could blow up the enemy plane without actually seeing them. So yeah, I don't know. I guess my point is warfare is not World War II anymore. The age
Yeah,
of yeah.
yeah, not by any
Yeah,
stretch.
yeah. I mean, like America operates B-52 squadrons even to this day. Like they're constantly upgraded, with new upgrade packages every few years.
That,
So yes,
that's going to continue to 2100, right?
yeah, it like theoretically it's going to last till 2100. I don't know if that's going to be the reality, but um Yeah, I mean, strategic bombers, like, they still have their role, but, like, I mean, also most of the time, there's kind of no reason to do mass carpet bombings anymore. So, like, what you're thinking of, like, World War II, like, Dresden, Tokyo, Berlin, Hamburg, etc., like, it's not going to happen. Well, I mean, it
Yeah.
could
Probably a
happen.
good thing.
It could happen theoretically, but that's in the theoretical. What I speculate is we probably won't see it unless we go into another total war of absolute survival ever again.
This is
All right,
probably
Yeah,
a good thing for
before
guided
civilian population.
munitions are like thousands times more effective than carpet bombing ever could be.
Yeah,
This is probably a good
carpet
thing for
bombing
the
would just be to
civilians.
demoralize an enemy at this point, like that.
Yeah, and of course we tried that in Nam, and we had very, very little success with carpet bombing Nam. Anyway, let's
Da-da.
Well,
before we leave
also
Ukraine.
guided munitions back then were also extremely expensive, like prohibitively expensive compared to today. Today,
Yes.
like it still is prohibitively expensive, and that's why Russia tends to prefer artillery because it's cheap and effective. Um, but guided munitions is is a more expensive way of taking out a target still to this day. So if you can avoid it, it's typically preferred by most nations. And also like Russia too, like they don't have the reason why like most Americans are like jarred. It's like, well, why didn't Putin just like completely destroy everything from the air? It's like, well, he doesn't have like he has a tenth of the size of the Air Force that America has. He can't do like the whole destroy them from 10,000 feet and then let the army just roll in through the ashes, essentially. Like that's what the first Iraq war was for us. It was just Air Force did 90% of the fighting, and then the army just kind of comes in and is like, oh well, we're gonna mop up.
Remember
All
that
right,
the
so
second largest air force in the world is the United States Navy.
Yeah,
yeah, so
that
let's
too.
let's before we move from Ukraine to, I suppose, Armenia, there is a little bit of a political thing going on in certain parts of Ukraine. I believe as we speak,
Can
Will wanted to talk about the referendums going on.
I bring this up, please? That's
Yes.
the idea. Okay, but the big thing about the referendums that I've heard is that regardless of whether or not the referendums are going to be legitimate, let's not get into that argument. The theory is that Putin will use these referendums to basically declare the occupied territories as rightful Russian land. So if Ukraine attacks them, he can then actually declare a formal war and therefore justify full mobilization.
That is precisely correct, and this is what I
Yeah.
wanted to get back into with mobilization. They cannot use those reservists in offensive operation law. However, by the referendums, are legitimate or not, if they declare that territory as sovereign Russian territory, they can deploy these reservists in those areas, and so now you have an area that is infinitely more bolstered. I don't know the effectiveness of these troops and how long it's going to be until they get there, but they will get there
Uh,
eventually.
So, I mean, I kind of like stick up for reservists, because I know that reservists can be effective. You can look at the United States, for example. I know like the Russian reservists don't like receive as much training as American reservists do. I know that, but you do see like National Guard units outperform U.S. Army active duty units. So like the effectiveness of these units, yes, is up to question. I don't doubt people questioning them because there are, but that's also the same with the active duty force. Like it's going to depend on the the hardware, the amount of retraining that a lot of these men get. The last time that they were actually in active military service, because most of these men are like just got out like only a couple of years prior, and it doesn't take very long to get to refresh former soldiers to their former capabilities that they once had. So I say these reservists will probably have an effect on the war in favor of Russia, because quite frankly, Ukraine called up all of its reservists essentially, and the best that they can do is take 3 towns in the north with a counteroffensive. Well, then Russia's only is only calling up about 300,000 out of about 2 million-ish reservists. So they're probably going to be picking the ones that have had more recent military experience than the ones that have been out for a long time, like the men that are around 42 years old. That's my guess, at least.
Much as I hate to say it, but if Russia goes full militarization, it's over for Ukraine, because at that point, Russia just has to drown the Ukrainians in the bodies, in the blood.
Well, I don't. Well, I'm not an expert on a lot of things, but I do know that perception that we have of the Soviet Union, where they just sent wave after wave of their own men against that was
I know, and I hate to use that comparison because that is a false comparison and a terrible understanding of
But-
deep battle planning and tactics. But at the same time, given the quality of the troops that would probably come from these reserves, it's a pretty fair assumption to say that that's what Russia will end up doing, is basically drowning the Ukrainians in blood until they finally give up.
I don't think
Did,
that
did,
I
did
don't think the
everything
Russian
I say
commanders
just
are going to
like wash over you guys? It's like reservists can be more effective than active military forces. I literally just said this.
Yeah, and I mean, I was going to say that I don't think that any Russian commander is just going to human wave, because one, that's just a stupid tactic. I mean, having overwhelming numerical superiority doesn't mean that you're just going to try to outwash them in blood. Like, having overwhelming numerical superiority doesn't give you a license to be stupid. I assume any Russian commander is going to try and ensure that as many of his men are going to get home as possible, even if he has a million or one of them, even if it isn't out of any humane reason. It just looks bad if you take 90.
So
Yeah.
I also make the point that it's like if they organize like new like say armored battalions, new infantry regiments, etc., or more of these BTGs, and like I assume the retraining of these reservists will probably be between 2 months on the low end to 6 months on the high end, with possibility up to a year. Especially if they're going to be training in newer Russian doctrines that have only been really implemented in the last couple of years, like say the implementation of the battalion tactical group as a type of unit, and organization of the Russian army, which I'm not like. Some people say like, oh, they're the like the win all of military units in the Russian army. I'm kind of skeptical of that, but it's going to be a while till any of these reservists actually hit the field, because they do need to be retrained. They need to be equipped and stocked. Like I've been through the process of a mobilization of a U.S. Army Reserve unit, and they took roughly a year of preparing to get prepared just for a deployment to Africa, where they're going to be doing construction ops to support special forces. So it takes a while to call up reserves, but once they're called and once they're retrained, they're typically as effective as an active duty unit.
Just maybe don't do the French though, and call up your reservists for about like a hot minute, and then send them back home, because you don't trust your officers and you're afraid they're going to overthrow the government.
Yeah,
That is the funniest military call up ever. Reservists, you're getting called up. Oh wait, we don't trust your officers. Go back home.
Well, no, I mean that was
that's
the
the French
interwar
for you.
French. That was the interwar French strategy, because the French officer corps. Imagine this: the French officer corps was Catholic. What is this? Catholics in France? What? Anyways, no. So the French officer corps was, like, generally speaking, Catholic and conservative and monarchical leaning, and the French Republic wasn't. And they really the fear was that if you put a large swath of the French population under the influence of these officers for a prolonged length of time, they would just the officers could just be like, "Hey guys, let's overthrow the government." Everyone would be like, "Ho ho ho, that sounds like a good idea." Ho ho ho.
Which that literally was Bonaparte. So
Yeah.
That's true. That's true.
I mean, it kind of hurt France. Apparently, and once again, I'm not an expert, but what I've heard is it hurt France in the war because when the reservists were getting, you know, put back into rotation to learn to relearn things, they only had time to get a refresher on what they were already taught, and there was no time to teach them about new doctrines. And since France, and I don't even think France really had a standing professional army at that point. It was just people getting called in and out of service for a brief time and then going back into the civilian world. So
no,
yeah, that kind of hurt the front.
they did have a standing army, but it was the active force was very small. I think
Okay,
it
yeah,
was like
that sounds
I think it was only like 200,000, which technically made it the largest army in Europe. But it's like, yeah, 200,000 is a massive army.
Yeah.
Woo.
yeah.
uh, What I mean, the only
So,
reason why they had the largest army in Europe or the most powerful was because, well, Germany was neutered in interwar.
Yeah. I will be interested in
so
seeing how they end up training these troops, if they might set up new camps or whatnot, and that's going to take a while.
I mean,
Oh,
also
go
like
ahead.
we were talking about like training bases as well. It's like, yeah, officially they have one basic training base, but that's for basic training. Like these are men that were in the military. Most likely they won't be cycled through basic training again.
And
They're
that's why I suspect I heard from some intelligence officers that they might put these guys in to replenish some units, and they might train with those units before they get redeployed back to the front lines.
yeah,
That might be what happens.
and and also most military bases, at least from my knowledge of like the United States military, like most military bases have training facilities on them. That's the purpose of having a military base, is not only just to garrison troops but also for them to train, conduct maneuvers. Like they typically have vast swaths of like land as well that they use for training of all types, so they can literally just assign to their nearest base, get assigned to organize into a unit, probably call up some reservist officers to lead said unit, and then put them through, assign them instructors from the active military to put them through the new doctrine and train them up for a few months, get them requalified on their weapons, get them requalified on any new equipment that they weren't prior knowledge of, etc. And like give them about between 2 to 6 months, and they'll be in okay shape probably.
so I'm assuming, does anyone have any final thoughts on anything to do with what's going on in Ukraine?
What's
Um,
the Russian industrial capacity looking like? Like, we know the Ukraine is getting lots and lots of foreign support, but how is Russia doing in replenishing their military material?
So
So
that's a complicated question. Baron, do you want to
yeah,
tackle this or should I?
I guess we can both pitch in.
Why don't you go since I cut you off last time?
Okay. Russia has some capability to produce some domestic components for stuff like say like tank sites. They need to update their tanks that they're taking out of storage. So what they do is they install these new systems that they have managed to produce domestically. There is a big issue though. A lot of their weapons, like cruise missiles specifically, they require Western parts. That's a big problem for them because they can't really source any Western parts currently. There might be some back channels that they might be able to access. I'm not entirely sure. But as it stands now, it's really, really challenging for them to access Western parts. As far as cheaper ammunition, like bullets and artillery shells and rockets and things like that. It's very, very easy for them to produce those kinds of munitions because they already have a bunch of and in fact these factories that are producing these munitions are they are churning out loads and loads of munitions where they're still exporting to the you can buy 7.62 from Russia if
Well,
you go to your
actually,
local sporting goods stores.
And also like they're also exporting with massive military contracts with like India and stuff. So like
Yeah,
the fact that they can still like export to foreign nations their military hardware means that they're not struggling for a lot of these weapon systems.
not at all.
oh, actually, I will say this. I mean, I don't doubt the India or whatever thing, but any Russian-made ammo that you can still buy here came in before a certain date, or it was agreed to send it here before a certain date, because a few months, I think, before this whole Ukraine thing kicked off, the Biden administration banned the importation of Russian ammo because reasons, I guess.
Well, they tried, and they did manage to get a ban
Where
through, but the goal that they are managing to get that stores are managing to still import Russian ammunition. Those stocks are still being replenished by some miracle. I don't know how.
Why did no one tell me this? I need my cheap steel ammo for a gun I don't have.
There's
I
plenty
can't
of
take
it.
the steel; it doesn't deserve the brass.
I mean, Kalashnikovs are one of the most reliable weapon systems in the world.
Yeah, I love
And
my
gorgeous
little.
too.
Yeah, I love my little Zhishka. She's a good weapon.
Right. So speaking of
better than
Zhishka's a Russian weapon. I think we're going to be seeing a lot of Zhishkas over in Armenia. Isaac, if you wanted
Oh
to.
yeah, yeah. So this is actually where I guess I have a lot more knowledge on context. Armenia and Azerbaijan, two countries in the Caucasus, have been at each other's throats for God knows how long. There was a war, I believe, in the 60s, and which Armenia won, and they took back of Nagorno-Karabakh. And to this day, in that region, it is an Armenian. Yeah,
No, it wasn't the 60s. It was the 90s.
no, 90s. Did I get my years confused? Yeah.
It was like,
Yeah.
actually it was 1991 with the split of the Soviet Union.
Yeah.
Armenia had more, let's just say, firepower capabilities than the Azerbaijanis. So it was quite, even though Azerbaijan called it more soldiers, Armenia had the firepower concentration and ability to destroy Azerbaijan. And then in the recent war, like
Yeah.
I don't know if you're going to get into this. But
Yeah.
Was it like 20? It was 2020, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it was. So war, the one in 2020, it was Azerbaijan that actually launched an attack on. It was almost a blitz, I guess, on Armenia, and like within the first few days, they were able to capture a substantial amount of territory. Huge reason for that is Turkey is giving them a blank check for weapons. That includes everything from planes, artillery, missiles, and drones, especially from Israel and Turkey.
Insane the alliances in this region are right now because of how the geopolitics works out.
Yeah, so I'll get on that in a minute. The drones were a huge deciding factor in the last war, and they proved it being in the current conflict, which is still in a truce by some miracle.
I heard the ceasefire was recently broken again.
There are reports, at least the Azerbaijanis are accusing the Armenians of firing at their positions. I can't really confirm that for sure.
I've heard that the Azerbaijanis are firing on the Armenians. We'll probably never get a clear sight of who's who.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true enough. The alliances are, at least for Armenia, are very shaky. Um, they have a strong ally in the south that's Iran, which a few, but Iran has an interest in making sure that Armenia is not going to be fully destroyed.
Ye-
Uh,
Yeah, that's mostly because of the fact that Azerbaijan is a Turkic nation by ethnicity and is trying
Yeah,
to align itself with Turkey, its bigger brother, and Armenia is effectively the buffer state that countries like Russia and Iran want to keep there to keep the Turks from forming their pan-Turkic idea.
And
precisely, and it plays into the three-way Cold War that's going on between Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and Iran. Um, but it's really just. Go ahead.
I support the Armenians for the sole fact that I am really scared of what could possibly happen if the Turks manage to pull off an absolute win, because the last time Armenia got dominated by Turkey, half their population got wiped out. So,
And
Yeah,
they did that relatively recently too. I mean, they did the same thing in 2020. I remember specifically the Azeris were shelling it wasn't just like shelling the cities and villages, but like they were actually drone striking buses full of evacuating civilians in Stepanakert. I mean, it was an absolute atrocity. And I have no doubt they would do the same thing if they're able to take even more of Armenia proper.
yeah.
in
I
the
mean,
territory.
also there's the religious factor as well that the Armenians are, for like 90 some percent of them are part of the Armenian Catholic Church, and it is
Orthodox.
well, they are like tacitly aligned with Rome. They're like kind of yes, but kind of no. It's weird with them. But
Always church.
besides that, Armenia was also I believe it was like the first or sec. I believe Georgia was like the first nation, and Armenia was the second nation to be converted to Christianity. But actually, in the time of the apostles,
Georgia
Ethiopia was the
was.
third.
I mean, it might have been Ethiopia you're thinking of.
Well, no, it's Ethiopia, Armenia, and Georgia were the first three Christian nations.
I wasn't
Converted
Georgia
in.
was a nation that early on, but
Yes, they were. I don't know if it went by the name Georgia, but what is today Georgia was one of the first nations to be converted.
Yeah, I know the Armenians are ancient though. Like there were like even before like centuries before Christianity, the Armenians, because Armenia before Armenian genocide, the Armenians were a lot more south. Well, I mean, I guess they were where they are now, but they were also
Yeah.
a lot more south. And they, if you hear about Xenophon's March of the 10,000 from what's his face? Call Me Ezekiel. Yeah, the Armenians make an appearance.
Mm-hmm.
Because
Armenians are the oldest ethnicities in the Middle East. They've been around since forever.
and
Yeah.
one of the contributing factors to that is, and it's also one of the reasons why they do have closer relations to Iran, is that they are a Persian people, and so their population spread, that was I guess, what do you call it? You can attribute that partially to the spread of the Persian Empire. The Armenians settled in a lot of different places. And I guess that kind of ties into what I will say about the CTSO, sorry, the CSTO, which is Russia's NATO. If any of you are unfamiliar, they have it's basically an alliance of nations. It's Russia, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Mongolia, Kazakhstan, Armenia.
It looks like it's really imploding.
Yeah, so here's the thing about that. So Russia's military kept the peace between CSTO partners, and they did so pretty effectively up until this war came. The war in Ukraine. It has diverted pretty much a huge portion of their professional military to actually just fight in Ukraine. They're having issues. They can't enforce the peace between Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan as much as they try. They've been fighting sporadically, and a lot of that is not just over but water resources as well. And as you know, there was an attempted revolution in Kazakhstan, I believe, last year. Slowly,
An attempted color revolution by the State Department. Our democracy spreading through diplomatic channels and NGOs.
Yeah. Here's the thing. I'm quote unquote helping Armenia. Armenia. So here's the difference. Azerbaijan gets a blank check from the Turks, right? They can get any weapon they want. They have access to a bunch of high tech, high end equipment. Armenia doesn't have that luxury. Their military capability was almost completely neutered in the 2020 war. And what aid that they were able to get wasn't free. Russia offered to give them weapons, but only them. So Armenia bought what they could. There was an offer from the U.S. to sell them weapons and give them billions of dollars in aid. No, the Turks are not helping the Armenians. In fact, the Turks actually have 45,000 troops on the Armenian border currently. The Turks are helping the Azerbaijanis. Anyway,
The genocide.
Yeah. So here's the thing. So in the last war, Russia managed to negotiate a truce between Armenia and Azerbaijan. Of course, Armenia had to give up a whole lot of territory, and the Republic of Artsakh was pretty much left completely surrounded by its enemies. With the exception, they had one thin corridor. It's called the Lyshin corridor. That was manned by, I think it was something like 6,000 Russian peacekeepers. Just like, I think now it's about 3 months ago, the Azeris, they took their forces stationed in the area and they just moved in, and the Russians didn't do anything about it. They didn't keep them out. And so now you have two big problems. The Russians aren't helping. They abandoned their peacekeeping positions. So now you have Artsakh that's completely surrounded, cut off from supply from the ground. And keep in mind, it's going to be extremely tough for Armenia to actually get supplies over there to begin with. So you have that problem. And you have the huge problem that even amidst Armenia being in Armenia proper, like their actual what is internationally recognized as their territory being invaded by Azerbaijan, there still hasn't been a response other than an investigative mission that was sent by the CSTO to see if it meets their qualifications for Article 4, an attack on one is an attack on all.
I will go ahead and say this. Regardless of your feelings about whether or not Russia was justified to start their operation in Ukraine, this war has proven disastrous for them on a diplomatic level. Whether it be...
Reality is, they don't care.
Well, I mean, I kind of have a pushback on that because already, they were diplomatically isolated by the quote-unquote international world, aka all the countries aligned with America. So, yeah, they were kind of being backed into a corner by this massive block of the world. So it's kind of saying, oh yeah, well, you have one less inch of height because of you going to war in Ukraine. It's yeah, technically it's less, but it's not by much.
So, betraying and abandoning your one of your few allies is kind of crummy.
It's not a good look. That's just saying the least.
Didn't Lavrov give a quote? I remember you sharing this quote with me. I don't have it in front of me right now. Do you have it?
I'm not really sure which one you're talking about.
Oh, the one about we will continue this military operation until
Oh
all of
yeah,
our.
yeah. They're going to continue until all the goals of the quote unquote special military operation are met, no matter how long it takes. That's what he said.
Yeah.
So, go
I
ahead,
just
Darth.
have to say also the special military operation will be elevated to a full war, possibly maybe in the near future.
Yeah, there were some rumors that were started by some leaks that alleged, and I'm not gonna say that these are true or false by any means, but they allege that there might actually be 3 waves of mobile that might total at least below or just at 1 million troops total that are being mobilized, which is crazy to think about. I don't know for sure if that's true. I'm just gonna say allegedly. That's something that can happen, but I'm not gonna say it will.
Yeah. I mean,
Since
we haven't seen mass armies like this in a long time, and like a lot of military theorists try to say, oh, the days of mass armies are over, but I'm still kind of skeptical because we haven't actually seen what a mass war would look like with million-man armies again. So I'm going to press X to doubt currently that they're going to mobilize 1 million men, but upwards of like 500,000 Russian troops in Ukraine, I could easily see. Because also, at a certain point, it's just diminishing return the more men that you have in a region. Just saying.
Right. So now I suppose for this particular war game, because Darth played defense last time, Darth will now play offense this time. So, Isaac, you will be Armenia in this particular war game.
Fine.
And because of the policy of defense first, Isaac, you go first.
Okay. So that's really tough because we're not really completely sure about Armenia's military numbers right now. They haven't really released much, so I don't really know how strong tank forces and whatnot. I suppose. What I could do is, of course, call up the reserves. Focus primarily on the front with Azerbaijan. I would be very concerned, however, with the front to the west with Turkey, on the border with Turkey, because there's about 45,000 troops, and who knows, because Turkey's already invaded Syria. Who knows if they're not going to attack Armenia. It's a very tough position because what you end up having to do is split your forces between 2 fronts, and that's something that Armenia can't afford to do. So what I would say is, have you heard a recent visit from Nancy Pelosi to Armenia?
No, I've not heard.
So she visited, and I was really skeptical about that truce holding up, but I think a big reason for that was because not only is there a mission from the CSTO to investigate conflict, but there was, I think, I don't know if she's still there, but but Nancy Pelosi did visit, and I have a sneaking suspicion. I'm not going to say that that she came to negotiate offer. They turned down the last one. Armenia did turn down the last one, but they might have the U.S. might have proposed another weapons deal. Now there is a problem with that. Armenia could take the deal, but there is a problem. That being, how long is it going to be till they get those weapons? And
what's it going to cost?
what is it going to
Yeah.
cost?
And I don't just mean money.
That's the big. Yeah. It's not just
selling
money.
your soul to the
You ship
American devil.
Yeah. So the big problem is that they do have an unreliable ally as far as has been proven in Russia. However, I don't think that they can actually afford to give up Russia as an ally, because that's the closest thing that they have right by them. That it would be extremely hard for the U.S. to actually support Armenia in a war.
Now,
I
if I could push back, it could also be very good for Armenia.
It could be. It
mean-
could be.
Close ties with the U.S. that could help discourage Turkey from supporting Azerbaijan because that might threaten their NATO relations.
No,
It's
well,
not.
the
No,
Turks.
the Turks have been trying.
Yeah,
I think we're all trying to say the same
they've been
thing at once.
trying to. Yeah.
Essentially, Turkey doesn't care about keeping in line with NATO, which normally I would say that's a good thing because NATO is kind of lame. But then Turkey somehow finds even worse people to support. So
Yeah,
I don't know
true
how
enough.
they do it, but yeah. So Turkey doesn't really care, and no one's ever going to eject Turkey from NATO because Bosporus, which we should have just given to the Greeks anyways, but whatever.
Yeah.
And I think
Yeah, that.
the thing
Yeah.
I hate most about Turkish foreign policy is how they're basically keeping the Syrian civil war going by propping up the last fledglings of the Free Syrian Army and the Islamists in Syria.
Because money.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, that's because I mean, nobody really knows what Erdogan's like plans is or his party, but like some people try to say he's a neo-Ottomist, which might be a possibility. Some people try to say he wants like Turkish revanchism, but
All I
I
know is
think
I kind of wish
he
that
just
coup
he wants to
succeeded.
keep the Arab world as destabilized as possible,
Yeah.
and Assad is a symbol of unity amongst the Arabs. So, and they don't want a strong Syria because of that.
So let's get
Um,
to, I suppose now, Darth, it's time for your war game. You are Azerbaijan attacking
Okay.
into Armenia. How do you win that?
So I'm just going to say flat out, I don't know enough about Azerbaijan's capabilities besides that they probably still have that same suicide drone capabilities that they had in the last war that were given to them by Turkey, which were literally just cheaply produced but effective kamikaze drones that they literally just flew into Armenian armored formations, which the Armenians didn't have a counter to all these small drones that were packed with anti-tank explosives. So I'm going to assume they have that capability again, and it's just going to be another attempt at a blitzkrieg that they did in the last war.
yeah, you have a blank check from Turkey. That's for sure.
Yeah.
And they don't.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's because somebody with drones with tanks. This is just a thought that I remember. Somebody, I think it was the chieftain actually, who said, drones now seem like the super scary thing at the tank because every 10 years somebody comes up with, oh no, the tank is dead because X, but then someone always develops a counter. It's very interesting that Cheaton said maybe soon tanks will have their own drones, which will mean that you can get rid of one of the biggest detriments of tanks, which is the fact that they're basically they're blind essentially when the commander has to shut this hatch. But it's like, how do you? But I still don't understand how you. And this is completely related. I still don't understand how you counter. Like, what would be the counter for all these all these little drones coming at you? Like, I just.
It would be those weapon systems used on like US Navy destroyers and cruisers, like those
The
like
sea one?
automated guns.
Oh, yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
Wait.
I think like the U.S. Army has those as well with certain anti-aircraft units because we know that that drones like that are a possible threat to operations. So we literally keep them on like on semi-trailers ready to go. At least in some units, like they're not as widespread yet, but
Another
that'd
big
be like the only like that'd be effectively one of the few counters that you could do unless you just started everybody is trained to shoot drones out of the sky, which that'd be pretty hard to train for.
Every man a marksman. Military
Which
Huey Long.
which
That's what
uh
that's what they've been trying to do in Ukraine to shoot down those suicide drones. I saw this video recently. These guys were shooting their rifles at the drone in like a desperate attempt to stop it because it came out of nowhere.
Another big thing is that laser weaponry is only going to get more and more advanced, and so we could possibly see precision laser weaponry being a big counter to these suicide drones.
I
I
don't
kind of
know
see
if
that. I'm hesitant to say that will
that.
be a possibility because it's one just going to be too expensive to equip on a
Yeah,
mass scale.
it's way really hard to implement, especially in a military like Armenia's. That's functioning pretty off of old Soviet equipment. It's going to be hard to actually power and keep that kind of tech out there in the field.
Okay, what if
Fun-
we can't get a Death Star, but we get like a Death softball? I'm sure any country can afford a Death softball.
Maybe.
Four still lying around somewhere. That could be a death softball. It's already killed 3 people.
What you cut out? What's killed 3 people?
The demon core. It's basically about the size of a softball. I mean, it's
Well,
pure plutonium, but
I'll pretend to know what you're talking about.
I
okay.
don't
So
think
already
it exists anymore, does it?
3 cores for the atomic bombs. One of them never got turned into a bomb, and it was called the demon core, and it was used by the U.S. military for physics experiments.
Oh,
Anyway, people messing around with the demon core and seeing how well it reacted ended up killing themselves because they accidentally caused it to overreact and expose themselves to lethal doses of radiation. And so this basically warhead that's never been used killed 3 people completely on accident.
that's
Wait,
not that. Don't mess with warheads, guys. Maybe I don't.
well, don't
Maybe
mess
no.
with warheads unless you know how to operate them. And
And even then,
speaking of operating things, Ukrainians were learning how to operate a tank via YouTube because Russia
comrade.
was just
It,
leaving tanks
That is
everywhere.
hilarious.
I mean, it's hilarious, but I also wonder like how actually effective that is. If that's just
Yeah.
a news story because
Yeah.
somebody was successfully able to do it, and 100 people before him tried and failed.
All I could
Yeah.
think is just some Indian dude inside a tank like, "Hello, thank you for joining us on this today's tutorial. We today will learn T-64 tank."
Now, in comparison to T-72 we looked at last week, T-64 is a little bit older, obviously, because, numbers, haha. But T-64 is reliable. It will get you where you need to go, and presuming it was not made in the last 20 years, it will kill anything you want it to kill. Take care of tank, and tank will take care of you.
Today we will teach you how to avoid a surface-to-air missile.
You
Alright,
can't.
let's
They had the video.
alright. Okay,
Adrian.
does sorry, go ahead.
No, never mind. I was just continuing the joke.
Okay. So I suppose this is a good time to bring this up. September is National Suicide Prevention Month. So we'd like to remind you that if you or someone you know is experiencing suicidal thoughts or tendencies, to call the National Suicide Prevention Hotline. I think now you can call 988 and get to the hotline. I don't know. I may have seen that somewhere. But if you don't want to talk, you can go to their website and live chat with them via their website, or you can text a certain number that I don't have in front of me, and you can talk via text message if that is more your style.
All right.
So, moving on from that, does anyone have anything else that they wish to discuss this week before we sort of, I guess, close?
I guess I do have something to add on that subject of suicide prevention. The number one leading cause of death for combat veterans right now is suicide. Of the, I think, around 6,900 that died in Iraq and Afghanistan, those were combat deaths. I think the number is around 100,000 that committed suicide, and that's it's absolutely appalling. So if you do have anybody, if you do know anybody with that are facing problems, please just let them know that it's that they're worth your time. They're worth something.
So, and the thing, thank you to, sorry, I got sidetracked here. Thank you to Kaiser Bob for reminding us about protests in Iran. Does anyone have any thoughts on those particular protests or wish to speak about them?
All I have to say, and I made this comment on Twitter, you're seeing massive protests against the police. You're seeing the population actively engaging the police. But want to know what you don't see, but you see in the US? You don't see this in Iran, and that's the mass looting of stores. BLM, please take note.
We're a first world country. We do things differently here.
Yes.
We're an example for the world to follow, not the other way around.
Yeah,
These uneducated
it's
peasants do it.
it's totally not like a homogenous nation can actually have some social trust.
Well.
And there's quite a few.
Yeah, so it's actually it's kind of scary, I think. There are some rumors. I have to say, allegedly, there's some rumors about police firing into. I've been trying to find that video that everybody's talking about, but I haven't found it yet. But allegedly, there's a video that shows Iranian police firing into crowds, and that's really scary. Something that scares me even more than that is the possibility if these protests later become like organized riots and eventually like to the point of violence where the nation might become split. I'm afraid that the US is going to set up a UN-backed government to do the same for them, and it might be another whole Libya situation. And that's not something that that the Middle East needs any extra of.
Now,
Oh
Yeah.
my, it's going to be
I agree.
Cold War. I think this is going to be Cold War. Sorry, Dorf.
Well, I'm not. It's like yes, kind of Cold War, but it's not going to be like as explicitly like ideological. It's going to be more. Do you want to be tied down to the global American empire, or do you want some level of autonomy? Like that. That's effectively it. The distinction between the two.
Now, to backtrack to the whole police firing into a crowd thing, I heard a very interesting anecdote, and I don't know if it's true or not, but rumor has it that the Iranian government called out the police to assist the revolution, not the police, but the army, like the National Guard, to assist the Revolutionary Guard. And the army and the military actively sided with the protesters against the Revolutionary Guard.
Really?
Yeah, this is.
Yeah.
I can't.
That's interesting.
Yeah, that's why Iran has not been, let's just say, using their military, especially in a lot of their foreign incursions. They've always been going to the Revolutionary Guard and treating them as the pseudo-military for years.
I'm going to look into that. Thank you for telling me about that.
So essentially, Nazi Germany, if they kept the SA and just decided to use the
Well,
SA for everything.
Well, I mean, the SS was also like kind of what the Revolutionary Guard is in Iran. Like it operates very much the same way, except for the SS had better uniforms overall. Like the SS in Nazi Germany was like the reason why they had like combat units and stuff was mostly just a way to get around the conscription laws that Hitler actually couldn't get rid of, like the laws around the army. Because the army was kind of like its own fief in Nazi Germany, where they made their own laws effectively, especially when it came to recruitment, and they didn't accept many foreign volunteers unless they were ethnically German, spoke fluent German, etc. So the SS they made all these Waffen SS units because then they could recruit foreigners to fight, and get around the army's recruitment law.
Another big thing about the Waffen SS is it was basically the military arm of the Nazi Party. It functioned partly as their paramilitary as well.
Yeah.
Well, yes,
I mean,
it was a paramilitary
it
force.
was. And the weird, I don't know. The S, when you start to think about it, because at that point, because the Nazi Party essentially became the German state, but there was still this division, but yet the SS was still, I mean, it still would have been German taxpayer funded, but it would,
What?
I don't know. The whole thing's a mess.
Well, the state was still seen as like a separate thing from the party, like especially like the National Socialists were very into formalism, and they very much did respect the idea that there's a German state and then there's the party, and the party is separate from the state, and that's why Adolf Hitler kind of stopped wearing the brown shirt, and he started wearing a more suit and tie, especially when he became chancellor later on. It was more of a later look after he was appointed that position because now he was the chancellor of the entire state, not just the head of his own party. And that proceeded on even until like 1944, where military officers weren't required to be members of the National Socialist Party until after the July Plot in 1944, where it was explicitly the monarchist faction within the Wehrmacht that attempted a coup against Adolf Hitler. And then that's when you did see the division of the 1945 and late 1944 were the only times where you could say that the state and the party were intertwined.
What is the most likely, I think the only real outcome here, because I'm seeing images of women tearing off their Islamic head coverings as a sign of
Resistance?
resistance. Yes, thank you. It's sort of weird in a way because we have no common denominator thing with Iran.
Where's that quote from Queen Victoria that I saved? When it comes to women's rights. Oh, here it is. I am most anxious to enlist everyone who can speak or write to join in checking this mad, wicked folly of women's rights, with all its attendant horrors on which her poor feeble sex is bent. forgetting every sense of womanly feeling and propriety, feminists ought to get a good whipping where women to unisex themselves by claiming equality with men. They would become the most hateful, heathen, and disgusting of beings and would surely perish without male protection. That's a quote from Queen Victoria.
Boy, did she call it or what?
Man.
You go, girl. No.
Yes, Queen.
I mean, we
Slay
can literally
Queen.
say it. You go, girl. You go.
Yeah.
Yes, queen. Oh man, you know what? I had to say that just bumped. You know what? Queen Victoria, she just bumped up on my British monarch tier list. She just bumped up a little bit more. Just that was
yeah,
that was
yeah. She was based in certain places.
yeah, that was oh, that was beautiful. You see, if I said that, I get smacked. But no, okay.
Hey, you can just say I am quoting Queen Victoria, a great feminine icon.
I mean, really, you don't even have to. You know how everyone yelled at me when I said, when I listed the I listed because like there was the women's anti-women's suffrage league in England, eventually just merged with the men's anti-women's suffrage league, and everyone got upset because I was just reading that list and saying that I kind of thought it was convincing. It's like I probably should have just said out front women's suffrage. I don't even believe in regular suffrage.
You've said that multiple times.
Yeah.
Only after I got through the entire list. But anyways, but yeah, I don't know. It was
So, we hope that the protest against the government of Iran succeed. Obviously, we pretty much side with these particular protests, but we are very wary of the results of these protests. This is going to be yet another geopolitical battle between the US and Russia.
I just
I want to hear like the Return of the King soundtrack and just rename it the Return of the Shah.
I mean
Because
I just no, in all seriousness, I don't know. I just hope that that there's as little bloodshed as possible. If it's just going to be everything's going to go back to normal, then okay. Because like there have been protests against Iran before. I'm not sure if they were in the same severity as against the government before. I'm not sure if they were in the same severity as they are now. But yeah, if it's not going to lead to regime change, I hope that no one gets hurt. And if it is going to lead to regime change, I hope no one loses their head over it. Yeah, I don't know. I don't want really. I just hope that this as many Iranians get out of this okay as possible, and that Iran has a prosperous future.
I believe that unless anybody has anything else, does anyone have anything else that they would like to bring up or discuss now as we get toward the end of this podcast?
Should old acquaintance? No, I don't know. I'm good. So everyone else.
Would y'all like to hear the new specs of Poland's military? What they're trying to get?
More ammunition.
That is, I think we can discuss that another time.
Yeah,
Okay.
Poland deserves its own episode. I don't know. I love Poland. Oh, I love Poland so much. All right. So no one has any objections. I'm getting the timestamp. Time.
If there is Poland, where is Pushland?
I don't know. Where's
Check
neutral land?
Rules.
What,
You know, and why does everything have
where's
to be pull or push?
Where's neutral land? I think you're just getting confused with Switzerland.
That's
And
actually kind of poetic.
Switzerland didn't break its neutrality for Nazis, but Switzerland broke its neutrality for Russia. Just remember that.
It's kind of poetic because like Poland has been in the center of a like international tug of war between like Russia and the West, which kind of makes me really sad as a Pole. But
Yeah.
I hope Poland can be independent at some point.
Yeah. I'm a quarter Slovak, so essentially we're cousins, I guess.
My
Yeah.
ancestors were in the battle
In the what?
You cut off?
of Vienna, not related to Poland. Oh, I was saying that my ancestors were in the
Oh.
Battle of Vienna, so I guess we're kind
Oh,
of
okay.
we're related by shedding the blood of the Turks.
Yeah.
we're part of the Holy League family reunion.
Perfect.
Right, and
let's
that
see,
is
I'll bring the croissant because isn't that where it came from? I don't know. Anyways, something came from that siege for some food. Anyways,
My ancestors were some random Ulstermen that lived in the Virginia frontier. That's all I gotta say.
and they moved to Ohio. What a downgrade!
Oh. Military war on the winning side. We got a nice land grant in Maryland. For some reason, we then left Maryland to move to Ohio, and we've been.
wait. Hold on a minute here. Where in Maryland?
I don't remember. Let me get Ancestry pulled up.
Well, we find out that Victor and Will are actually like 15th cousins. Because I mean, because obviously, you know, Adam and Eve turned out to be, you know, I mean, obviously they were, but you know, they're real
For
people.
the record, it wouldn't be 15th cousins. There, I think it would be closer to 5, 6, or 7
Well, yeah,
cousins.
I know, but it's just I'm trying to think because I mean, at some point we are all related because we do have because we all have one man, one female ancestor, but I'm trying to. It's like what is what is the furthest distance that like we have, like, you know, 100th 50th cousin 15 times removed, because like, you know how generations always, you know, like drift apart, where I have a cousin who's like 40, and then my oldest aunt is in her 70s, and my dad, who was the in-law of that aunt, it was the youngest, and you know, I don't know. It's just generations are weird because like family trees are always get messy, especially when you have large amounts of kids, because you know you have all this like time between the kids, and then like, you know, the first kid may already like you may be an aunt or an uncle before you're even out of elementary school. Like I had a classmate who was like an uncle when he was in second grade. I don't know. That's weird to think about. See, this is what happens when we go to like 1023. You just get my random stream of consciousness getting.
All right,
This
so
is the kind of quality content we come here for. We can.
I believe that it is time for you to do the outro, Charles. So
Okay, let me do the thing. No one has any objections. We're all good. We can all go nap after we say our prayers. Okay. Um. Let me just. Okay. So, if you would like to join us live and hear my incoherent ramblings and bask in the beauty of them, you can join us on Discord. Link in the description below. If you would like to hear our hot takes at bashing British Republicans, you can see what Will's doing over on Twitter, since he's the guy who mainly runs it. Even though I guess technically that's my job, but I'm too lazy. And if you want to see what I have to say, because I try to use it now, you can see what I have to say on the Gab, which is like Twitter but full of neocons. So it exists. We also have the Facebook group, because it used to be the Facebook before Mark Zuckerberg dropped the, and we also have an entire website just for us because yay. But yeah, so you can see all that plus Instagram, because whatever, in the description below. And now it is time to conclude in prayer. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost. Amen. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven.
Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us, and lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil.
Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost. Amen. So, until next week, may God bless you, and may God bless the United States of America.